So as I said, I came from Tucson. I actually grew up in, I'm Bangladeshi, so I was born in Bangladesh. I grew up in Malaysia and Brunei, Southeast Asia. So I speak Bengali, obviously, Malay, English, and I learned Japanese. And coming over here with such an international crowd, none of that helps me. So hopefully the English will work for everyone. For the session here, this is my first time in Paris, so I thought we'd have some interesting discussions in some of that. So if folks who don't know me, I am a blogger, I am a strategist for IBM, and I write a few books too. So just some quick information about that. I work right now in the sales transformation part of the organization itself. So we work on inside the organization. What do we need to do to make ourselves work better? How do we change our modes to interact better inside the organization between the different roles? Whether it's sales, how does sales communicate externally? How do they participate with each other in the enterprise, as well as in the Twitter space, in the people space, or other people call it meat space. I'm not sure if that's a good term. So my last book was Social Networking for Business, and this was published by Wharton about 2 years ago. I will touch briefly on one of the topics that's in there. And it's very much more on the how do you organize and how do you model collaboration from small groups to large groups. But the topic that we're going to talk about today is slightly different. And I'm going to start with business value creation. So the 4 concepts that you see on stage here, on the screen here, is they are the archetypes of value creation. Almost everything that you can come up with would fit into one of these categories. Obviously, there are specific things in different weights. So customer value, operating efficiency, quality in operations, and organizational culture. So you drive your business and you create value in different roles in the organization based on which part of this that you're actually helping to push. Now, one of the things to notice is this statistic, which has really changed the dynamics of what we have. 65% of line of business buyers will buy without IT. This means that different parts of the organization are now making some of the technology decisions there, whether it's influence or to actually purchase itself of what they need. Because the technology has really grown up to what they really fit into the different parts of the organization. So marketing has software, marketing has capabilities just for themselves. Sales has all the CRM capabilities which are growing up for themselves. And these are decisions that they are making, not necessarily on the technology itself, but on how does it fit their part of the process, their part of the enterprise. So when I say line of business, it's referred to by different terms. Enterprise functions, departments. What I really mean are some of these examples here. So sales, marketing, customer service, human resources, research development, supply chain. So these are all different lines of business in the description of the term itself. And when we have looked at it, so we know these walls exist in the organization. There are many different roles that we have here. Each of those departments exists within its own walls. We know we try to work through these things. These are the inconveniences that we have from just running and operating a business. And this is what we really like to have. At least within our organization, we'd like to have fewer walls preventing us from working with each other. The reality is, this is what social media has really started to do. Conversations are happening everywhere, regardless of what we think. They are happening between people in the organization, people outside the organization. And they're just scaling. These are business conversations. They span all sorts of lines of business, whether it's customer support, whether it's marketing, and they're scaling. And they're growing. So at a certain point, you understand all these conversations creates a bit of chaos when it's all over the place, when you don't have a defined framework of what's going on here and where are we actually going with this. So how do you actually make sense out of this chaos itself? More and more open cross-silo conversations does not mean that the department functions, the line of business in organizations is going away. You still need to do that business, even though if people are having conversations in different areas, internal, external, either of those concepts there. So this is the basic problem. How do we go from what social business enterprise has done and take it towards what we were focusing on in line of business itself. So how do we harness the power of these conversations? Now, we start by adding some structure. The structure here is not to control the conversation or how people interact or things of that nature. It's actually to accelerate that. You need structure so people have an idea of what do we do when there are so many people coming and leaving the conversation. What's the order? Where are we having these conversations? So this map here is this idea graph is was not published in my book, unfortunately. I don't know why we got left out. But it is the core of the ideas in the book itself. Each of those elements is a different part of structure. So for example, places, well, that's the content. That's the visual environment, the online environment, interaction. The domain is who you work with, whether it's inside the organization, cross-boundary, which is externally. People, so this is what actions can you do with people? Can you communicate with them? Can you send them a message? Can you build relationships? How do you identify trust? Who do you trust with and what your network looks like? And that builds up into stronger elements like, how do you lead groups of different scales? Now, how do you manage the communities? How do you actually help them grow and then develop those relationships? Finally, purpose, which is, what is the culture that's growing up here? And how does that culture compare to your organization's culture itself? What are the tasks? So when we talk about all these collective intelligence and everything, there's a task behind that. We're asking people to do something. What is the actual task? What is the step-by-step thing that they're going to be doing? So all these elements really come together to build a social experience. And this is just a generic framework for modeling different types of experience, whether it's a simple thing with one single team or something that you're going to span across millions of people. So that is the concept of applying some structure to all the conversation that's going on. Now, structure must still be aligned with the values of the organization. What are you pushing? What is your agenda and the mission that you have in your organization itself? But one of the things to recognize is that this value is not the same thing for everyone. So the emphasis is different. So if you're looking at HR in the bottom there, their interest is more on how do you drive organizational culture. So value creation through organizational culture. How do you, improve operating efficiency? In development, product development, design, research, it's in quality. It's also customer value. The other elements don't go away, but the priorities shift. Sales, customer service, their primary concern would be customer value, as well as excellence, quality and operations. So the considerations here are different. And not only that, this is not a generic formula for everyone. This is what your organization puts in there. What is the emphasis your organization will actually have on some of these factors? For example, you could have, in product development, a whole lot more emphasis on operating efficiency and cutting costs. So how do you develop the products by improving the efficiency of how you develop and distribute them? So this is the first step towards that. You have the structure. You have an idea of what the value is and what the priorities are for the different lines of the business itself. These three groupings that we have is one of the interesting ideas that we've noticed as hotspots in the enterprise. So you'll see later, but they actually refer to product and service innovation, the first category in the top. The second one is on customer care. And the third one is on workforce optimization. So these are some of the themes that we've been working on and how do we develop in those areas. But so we need to look at these structured social conversations and how they are adding or they're creating value to these specific lines of business based on their issues and their processes. So the emphasis there is not just to have conversation for conversation's sake. Even if it's guided and you have a great model for how you get a lot of people to talk and interact with each other, how does it actually fit the mission of what you're doing in your department? Okay? So the emphasis there will change as we go along. So first, to take a look at that, we have to consider how does social actually create value itself? And then the second question is, how does this map, this value that comes inherently from having social and enterprise interactions, how does it actually apply to the lines of business? So these are 4 levels of how does social create value itself. In fact, the first one, many will recognize as one of the early goals of knowledge management, and continues to be so. How do we capture unstructured knowledge? Second one, collaboration discovery. How do you build on that knowledge to create more ideas? So you have captured this information, you know where it's occurring in the organization, maybe you don't. It's transient, it changes all the time. But how do you encourage that and develop those ideas which really stand out? Then the next level beyond that is analytical insight. How do you actually go beyond that, see how the transactions are occurring, who's interacting with whom, what are the patterns that are coming out of it? Finally, transformation. So one of the points with capturing unstructured data, value level 1 here, this is a statistic that is argued a lot. 72, some say 90% of all the information in the organization is unstructured. Whether it is a conversation on a phone, it's something people talk to each other, it's an email, it's a bit of information that basically defies category, or you're not going to spend the time categorizing it. And that's growing, as this point says, at 10 to 50 times faster than the structured data we have. Now, one of the things that social really does is accelerate that even further. So you have social conversations, and they are creating more and more unstructured data. But there's a difference. Now, if it's done online, it is being captured. Now, the problem there is, how do you create value out of that? The basic level itself, you're just trying to capture that. So you're trying to capture that. You're trying to capture the metadata about that. How do you add information and taxonomy to that information? How do you organize that? And now we're transferring what we have in our heads into an actual system there. There was a researcher, Etienne Wenger, and his description of it is called reification. So it's actually making something out of basically a mental concept that you have, except it is in a document, it is in a file, it is in a system somewhere. Now, the second level, collaboration and discovery, it is exploring that idea, that concept, that thought that you had, and taking it to another level. So it could be something someone originated, and it's something that's useful for a different department or a different project. So it is adding the value of the network that comes in, the conversation that stem out of that. Now that has a lot of facets to it itself. It is, how do you get people to engage each other, to converse? How do you get people to actually interact with each other? The more complex things are decision making. How do you get a group of people to make a decision? So these are also other elements, they are creating value. The fact is that if you can actually create the structure for this, now you are creating a new type of way of making decisions. So you're creating a new type of way of exploring the idea. Now, it's also identifying failures, identifying constraints and weak points. So things like that is what does not come up when you actually run the process. It usually happens somewhere else. Oh, something broke. What am I going to do? I'm going to ask my friend John, and he's going to tell me how to fix it or go around it. So if that's not happening in the process itself, that's a social conversation happening somewhere else. And if we can actually have that social conversation written down, then maybe we can get one step better to improving the process itself. So the third level there is all this interaction that's going on is creating data. It's also creating a problem in itself. Now we get so much data, how do we actually go through that information? This is called the big data problem. Big data is actually, it's thrown around a lot, but it's an algorithmic issue more than anything else. Now that you have all this conversation going on, how do you understand the relationships, the impact, how that's being transferred across the organization itself? Now, there are technologies which are doing that. We've had different types of technologies working on this for way before there was a word for big data itself. It was search. That was one way of looking at it. It is social network analysis, another way of looking at it. It is just the activity that's going on there. Find out where the hot spots are, what are the topics there. Sentiment analysis is one of the hot topics now. Not just in the external world where you're listening to the entire web, trying to find out what are people thinking about your brand, but you could be listening inside your organization. So what is the sentiment going on about this project? What do people feel? Is this going to be a success? So accelerating decisions based on data, on the behavior of people, the sentiment, the attitudes that they have in there. So that is creating a different type of value in itself, insight that we did not have before. So the final level is transformation. So transformation looks at how do you take all these ideas that we have. We're getting live data now. We are having conversation, new ideas are coming out. How do you actually change the way the processes occur? Rather than saying, well, we're going to plan it out for the next 12 months, these are some of the changes that we can do. How do you actually make that happen in a shorter cycle? So what parts of the process itself that actually need to be smoothed out that you can actually say, well, social will take care of this problem. You know, if exceptions happen here, maybe the best way of doing it is trying not to have a perfect process that will analyze every single possibility, but to have the conversation at this point. So it is inserting part of what we do into the systems that we have itself. So not only handling process exceptions, there's also process frustration. This is something that people don't talk about enough. Yeah, how many employees get frustrated with it? How many customers get frustrated with these things? And the customer one, we hear about it all the time now. You know, somebody goes out in social media and says, well, you know, I called them, they went through their process, and their process just sucks. You know, I'm a very unhappy customer because they have to go through their process of what they're doing. But for me, that is a terrible, terrible experience. One voice, maybe. Maybe it's 100 voices. Maybe it's 10,000 voices. Things like that actually start to, you know, we call it, you know, steamrolling, basically, and get bigger and bigger. But that process frustration is part of it as well. There may be nothing wrong with the process technically, but it's creating frustration. That's a psychological thing that you have to deal with. So these 4 levels of value actually have a scale. So from getting to specific gains, how do you solve specific problems, to broad value for the entire organization, broad value for the entire process itself. And we'll take a look at this shortly. So now the second part of it, how does that value actually map to the goals, the challenges, the processes, lines of business? So let's take a look at some of these examples. Like I mentioned, there were 3 scenarios here. The product service innovation, customer care, workforce optimization. And the roles that you see there are some of the lines of business related to this. Starting with product service innovation. So what are the goals? Now this data is based out of different studies that we have done in the IBM Institute for Business Value. And it's because the IBV does its analysis by role, specific roles, like what is the CIO facing, what is the HR officer facing, you know, the CEO study, the CIO study, CMO study, things of that nature. These are actually amalgamate of several of these things. So these are some goals that you may have. It may not be entirely yours. It could be something different for, if you are a product services development group, you may have slightly different goals. But let's just work through some of the thought ideas here. So I'm picking one thing in particular here for the product innovation here. So innovate through partnerships. Rather than build everything ourselves, let's start partnering with others so they can build pieces of it. They can build pieces of the idea, pieces of the actual product, supply us with the things that we need. So what are the challenges that we face there? Inflexible legacy models. Infrastructure itself is what limits us from doing this. Lack of continuity of expertise. Our people are retiring. We don't have the people to continue building on this. You know, so we need to partner with someone else. Limited expertise in some areas. We're going to go into a new area, partner with someone else. So these are some of the challenges that they might face that are related to the goal itself. Now the capabilities is the other side of it. It's the opposite side of it. So what can we actually do to alleviate some of these issues? So some of the common ones are, you know, build communities of practice, build external partnerships, whether it's industry, academia, sometimes it's even your competitors. It is generate ideas through customer co-creation, like we did with the Social Business Jam. So in the Social Business Jam, probably, there were 2 last year. There's one in February and one in November. And the first one was brought together just on the business level. What are the issues that we think, you know, what's the state of the market? Where is Enterprise 2.0 going? Where is social business going? And what are the issues that you come up with? So that was bringing in outside expertise. That was partnering with the thought leaders across the industry. So we brought in at least, I think, 70 to 100 different thought leaders, as well as invited everybody else to come in and say their piece. So that is one way of exploring how product and service innovation can actually further their goals. So now, that is the capability itself. What is the actual strategy? What are you actually going to do? So this is one model here of what can you actually do. So the challenges and the goals that we have here define strategy. Okay, so this is what we're going to do at different levels. Describe the innovation qualities and values that we need. You're trying to capture that information. Are people doing these things that we think we need in innovation? So it might be thinking of new ideas. So are they going beyond our field itself to bring in other ideas? They may not have that documented in research papers. That might be just, hey, I thought of this idea, and I think it might help. But I'm not going to write a whole paper on it before we start exploring that idea. So let's build on that. So this is, let's say you are in farming, and you find an idea from engineering that you want to bring in there. Okay? So I'm not going to risk, let's say I'm a researcher, I'm not going to risk doing this without getting some input from other people. That's the collaboration aspect. So that's the next level there. Identify the hotspots of innovation there. So who else is thinking about that across your organization? That's the hotspot that you want to find. How do we bring those together? Maybe they know each other, maybe they don't. Next level is define the metrics for innovation strategies. What are you actually looking for? As a strategist there, you're actually looking for, are new things coming up? Literally it's counting. How many new innovative ideas are coming out? How many different groups are involved? How wide does that spread across the organization? That's a simple way of looking at that. And finally, what is the actual goal for innovation? Now, this is at the highest level itself. So the execute part of it is the opposite side of that. How do you actually go out and do that? So if you need to find the qualities and values, build a system to capture those ideas. Build a system to expand and collaborate on those ideas. Build a system to capture the data behind those things. Find a way in your process to make that real. You know, if your process, your innovation process is actually modeled and written down, take a look at it and how that compares to your strategy itself. Now, this is just one possibility out of several over here. And we'll keep looking here into the next role here. So customer care and insight. You know, they're looking at different things. So the goals might be to improve brand loyalty. That's pretty straightforward there. Enhance customer relationships, integrate insight, accelerate customer responsiveness. And this spans across marketing, spans across sales, and spans across customer service. It's a responsibility across many lines of business itself. So here, integrate insight. It's a very common task that's occurring right now. Is tell me what I know about the market around my product. Not just about my product, but what's going on in the whole thing. And some of the challenges might be we are unsure what's being said about the company. We know there's some analytic capability, but it's spread across so many different functions, we have no idea where it is. It could be that we just are slow in coordination, and we know that for a fact. People have told us so. So the capabilities here, again, reflect that. Detect risks in the brand in real time. Identify and map experts that can help you. So I'm going to go ahead to the next slide here. Define strategy. You know, here we're looking at how do you participate in communities outside your organization itself. That is to try and create an environment to capture that data again, that unstructured data. Identify supporters and detractors. Okay, this is the collaboration aspect. It is not the aspect of actually getting them to interact there. You're looking at it at a level beyond that. It says, so who are the ones with the bright ideas there? So insight there is, what are the risk factors to listen for? You know, we're trying to get insight from this. What are we actually listening for that is a risk to our brand, a risk to our product? Now, what is the process that we have, the transformation level? What is the process that we have to actually handle those risks and as well as change our processes, if we need to? Not a one-time thing, but as you go through the year, how flexible are we in that system? And moving a little faster here. Workforce optimization, client goals. Now, this is inside the organization. How do we optimize for speed and agility? How do we mobilize for that? If a crisis happens, how do we move quickly to handle something like that? How do we retain expertise as it's leaving the company? The flip side of that, how do we improve recruiting and onboard new employees, create a culture of sharing. So mobilize with speed and agility. So these are some of the things that might happen inside the organization: frequent exception handling, locating resources, coordinating effort. Now, these are all the things that slow down the organization itself. Non-collaborative culture. Now, that's a very broad level of looking at those challenges itself. Now, what are the capabilities that we have? The capabilities is that we could provide channels for consistent messages and linking between resources and experts. So we have an organized way how experts can interact with each other and interact with the rest of the organization. How do you facilitate communities to do that? That's one way of doing that. Another way is directly to the expert. As well as the real-time risk monitoring also applies here. There's just different risks. It's not the marketing risks. Now it is the employee and the culture risks and things of that nature. And we know those are increasing. With more interaction, that certainly happens. Capabilities. You executives still have influence. Whether it's a blog, whether it's video, it is not just putting something out there, but also willing to take feedback directly. Not having an army of people respond for them instead. So let's look at the other side of this. To the strategy here, encourage employees to communicate and interact, and that creates unstructured data. That's a wealth of unstructured data coming straight out of that. Build cross-silo interaction. That's another strategy level where we're saying, okay, it's not just you can talk, but let's talk with different groups intentionally and plan that out. Let's say we want these groups to talk more, and we will monitor for that. So what are the hot topics that come out of something like that? What are the exceptions that come out of that? What are the decision processes that we see coming out of that environment itself? The final part of there is, how do you reduce friction for decision making? If you have an understanding where the hotspots are and what are some of the issues there, you have a better handle on that. There's another solution. You cannot solve every single aspect of friction in enterprise organizational friction, but you can help to mitigate and minimize some of that. So executing that is just, how do you put that into a plan in action there? So when you think about this, value creation starts with the conversation, but you're structuring it. You structure the experience that people have. Think along the lines of business and the goals that we have, the challenges and the processes that they face. So it's not just a structured conversation to a purpose. Finally, think of how do you take that purpose and map it to a strategy and execution, and how do you actually execute on that? The idea really is, the value creation started us off is, these are the areas that we really want to improve on. But really what really happens is, you come back to what is value actually being created for the whole thing. So these are the ideas that I'm thinking of, that we're working on, and in particularly what we are driving our products and solutions on. So the line of thinking there, again, what are the problems? How do we structure the conversation around it? What are the line of business issues that they are facing and that we're going to deliver on? And then how do you develop that strategy to actually build on that? Thank you.
Just stay for a short Q&A session, which is directly to your presentation. So you're welcome already. Well, we can take 2 to 3 questions here with short answers. I'd like to start off with the question. So what I see here, that we're entering now at a stage where, when we talk about enterprise SEO and social business, it's not easy anymore to talk or to give advice what to do or where we stand off, because now I just saw a tweet of Samuel Driesen, who related your talk to one of our roundtables last year, where we started off talking about how to relate business processes to social.
Yeah.
And now, as we're entering now, try to really connect these two things, really get social into the line of business and create some real business value. there's no one answer on how to do it right, is it?
And that's exactly the point. I mean, there's no one answer for the entire enterprise. There may be similar answers for parts of the organization itself, and similar things that people are tackling up front. So, for example, marketing organizations are certainly thinking about how do you tackle sentiment analysis and listening to the customer. So it is a common thing that's being taken out and being implemented in lots of organizations. But how they actually do that and what they're listening for is different. So it's important to get down to the specifics of what your organization actually needs.
Are there any questions? Not yet. So then I would leave you at this point because we start with we have another discussion round afterwards, and I'd like to give you another warm hand again for his keynote, and then.